up and sit down.
Hello and welcome back to Janessa After Dark, and not just any old Janessa After Dark. This is the second of our very special episodes. If you didn't have a chance to catch the first very special episode from season 1, I like to think of it as an opportunity to break from our typical interview format and spend a little time just doing some micro interviews with people on a specific topic. The episode last season focused on drag queens and gender identity, and I talked a little bit about my gender journey and interviewed 11 fantastic performers who all talked about what their gender identity was and how they experienced it and how they described it and how it either did or did not impact the performances that they brought to the stage. For this episode, I wanted to get a little bit more personal. I wanted to talk about relationships. And specifically, I wanted to focus in on non-monogamous relationships. And to be even more specific, I wanted to focus on ethically non-monogamous relationships. There are lots of relationships that have a non-monogamous component because one or the other people in that relationship is cheating. That's not what we're talking about here. There's all different kinds of definitions and ways of naming or describing these kinds of relationships, and I am certainly not putting myself out there as an expert. But basically, ethical non-monogamy means that the people in a relationship have decided together that monogamy is not necessarily going to be the defining attribute of their relationship. It often means that more than two people are involved in a specific relationship structure, or it may mean two people who are in a primary relationship that have other partners or other people that they're dating or seeing, or maybe just seeing in a sexual capacity. As I said, there's all different kinds of names and arrangements, and that's what I wanted to dig into and explore a little bit. In case this is your first time joining us, my name is Janessa J. Champagne, and I'm your hostess. I've been a drag performer in the North Dakota area and around the region for getting closer all the time to about 2 decades. I did my first actual show in 2001, and I've been performing ever since. And before that, I was sort of playing with gender and dressing up, and I was sort of a party girl. I knew a lot of people who were in bands or who were kind of the artsy, punky, rebel kind of crowd, and I would just get dressed up, and I would go to house parties, and I would have a good time. Now, off stage, I was also attending the University of North Dakota, and in my undergrad, I was in the honors program and the integrated studies programs, which were programs that allowed you to really customize your learning and integrate things together in a different way. And that's really become foundational to who I am as a person, because while I was exploring gender and sexuality in my personal life, I was also exploring it through my studies. I did a bachelor's degree through the honors program where I focused a lot on creative writing, mostly poetry and a little bit of memoir writing. And towards the end of my undergrad, I discovered theory, and specifically queer theory. When I decided to pursue a master's degree in English, I focused on queer theory and gender performance and looking at how people do sexuality and gender in our culture, in our media. And that was one of the ways in which my personal life and my personal explorations of gender really coincided with more academic inquiries. And as we're going to talk about in a little bit, that intersection between the things that I've studied and I've researched and the things that I've been exploring through my personal life has continued, and certainly informs how I think about ethical non-monogamy and what I'm looking for in a relationship structure. So now that I've given you my sort of loose credentials, pun intended, and before we get to our interview guests, I want to just talk a little bit more about how ethical non-monogamy is a part of my own relationship history. When I was growing up, like a lot of kids, I loved Disney movies. And specifically, I loved The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. Of course, now a master's degree later, I realized that Stories about a woman who has to radically change her body and give up her voice to win her true love, or a woman who falls in love with her kidnapper are probably not the best messages about relationships to give to children. But Stockholm Syndrome aside, I was in love with the idea of love. And though it took me a long time to come to terms with my own sexuality and gender identity, I knew that I wanted to find my very own handsome prince. I absolutely believed in true, abiding, monogamous love because that's what was presented to me. That's what was put forward as the ideal and really as the only option. There was sort of monogamy and true love, and there was cheating. Now, in my mid-20s, I was in graduate school really immersed in queer theory and the history of radical sexuality and radical queerness, and I met the man who would eventually become my husband. And while in a theoretical sense, I absolutely believed in the validity and efficacy of non-monogamous relationships, I still believed that what I really desired, what I really wanted was a monogamous partnership. I wanted to have one partner who fulfilled all of my needs. And I met this man and we were dating, and we did all of the things that you're supposed to do while you're dating. We became exclusive, we eventually moved in together, and then he proposed. And I've written and recorded about this relationship before. I don't need to get really deep into it, but that relationship taught me a lot about the limits of one person to fulfill all of your emotional needs. Now, some of that could have been the person that I chose. I chose someone who was not necessarily a great match for me. And when that relationship ended, I had a very bitter, cynical view of monogamy. I thought I never want to do that again. I'm not interested in that as any sort of option. A couple of years later, I started dating somebody who was in flight school at UND, who was in a non-monogamous relationship. We're going to talk about terminology a little bit later in the episode, and I did ask all of my guests about the terms that they use for their relationship structures, and the term that he used was polyamory. He and I dated for about 2 years, and it was a really nice, comfortable relationship. I really appreciated the companionship that I found in that relationship. And he's really the only ex that I've ever had that I've wanted to stay friends with. He's actually one of the people that I interviewed for this episode. But while there were a lot of good things about that relationship, it also taught me a lot about the things that I'm not looking for in a relationship. That relationship was exactly what I was looking for at the time, because I was feeling very bitter. I was feeling very cynical about relationships after my divorce. And so it was kind of a case of the universe sending you exactly what you ask for. And what I was asking for at that time was a relationship that didn't have a lot of commitment, that wasn't very serious, that was much more casual and was just about a sweet, friendly companionship. And that's exactly what I got. And once again, I wasn't completely satisfied. I wasn't finding everything that I needed. While I was in that relationship, I started to do a little bit of research into polyamory and non-monogamous relationships. It was certainly something that I had encountered before in my studies of gender and sexuality, but I wanted to find out some of the more current thinking about the topic, some of the more current discussions that were up, and it now had much more of a personal relationship to me. It was something that affected the dynamics of my personal life. And I found some articles that were really interesting about solo polyamory. And the way that these articles described the concept of solo polyamory is a person who's in a polyamorous relationship structure, but either by choice or just by circumstance, they don't have a primary partner. Now, for some people in polyamorous relationships, there isn't even a desire for a primary partner. And so those are the people who might choose more of a solo polyamory path. Or some people may desire a primary partner or a specific type of primary relationship, but because of the circumstance or where they're at that moment, they don't have it. And that's kind of what they were describing in these articles about solo polyamory. And it really got me to thinking about what I wanted in a relationship structure, because I had gone from being married and being in what was expected to be a monogamous relationship into this very casual, very sweet, non-monogamous relationship, but where I didn't have a primary partner. And what I found is that while I'm still very much open to non-monogamous relationships, and I think that non-monogamous relationships offer a lot more in terms of personal satisfaction and the range of emotional support and development that's available, I realized that I'm not necessarily very good at polyamory if I don't have a primary partner. At that time, I thought I wasn't looking for a primary partner. I thought I was looking for something just casual and simple. And I found myself getting upset when that relationship didn't give me the things that I expect to get from a more primary partner. During that relationship, I was certainly still sexually active and still seeing other people sexually, but I wasn't really seeing anybody else romantically. And that's where the deficits in my relationship really came out, is that I started to put a lot of expectations on him and on this relationship that weren't a part of the relationship that we had agreed to. And that's one of the core pieces of any sort of non-monogamous relationship structure, is communication and understanding what the boundaries are. I've had people say to me that polyamory or non-monogamy or whatever you might call it is wonderful because there's never any cheating. And I thought, that's somebody who doesn't really understand what ethical non-monogamy is all about. Of course, there can still be cheating. Just because you're not limited to only a monogamous two-person pairing doesn't mean that there aren't still rules and boundaries and expectations. And one of the keys to a successful non-monogamous relationship, at least from my experience and from my research, is having really good open communication, having a good understanding of each other's wants and needs and desires, and an understanding of each other's boundaries and limits, and being able to work within those boundaries and limits, being willing and open to negotiating what you need in a relationship versus what you're willing to put up with or what you're willing to allow in your relationship. And so that relationship was really a great learning experience for me. And it helped me get a handle on how I think about relationships and how I then take that and look toward the future and the relationships that I want to build going forward to make sure that I have properly negotiated boundaries and that I am getting my emotional, romantic, sexual needs met by the partner or partners that I choose to have in my life. All right, so before I get to my interview guest, let's take a quick moment to just talk about some of the terms that you might hear in this episode or that you might run across if you're researching polyamory and non-monogamous relationships. There's a lot of different terms, there's a lot of different relationship structures, and people really in their own lives are finding and negotiating new ways to create relationships and partnerships and find love and emotional satisfaction all the time. What I find really interesting is that sometimes there's a little bit of, I don't know if it's a competitive spirit or a little bit of rivalry or actual drama or what, but there are sometimes people who are very particular about the terms that they use and making sure that they differentiate one term from another. So one example is that a few years ago, I met a bunch of people who were part of a specific community of polyamorous people. And the term that they used was polyamory, and they were involved in a couple of community groups that educated people about polyamory. And they were very explicit to draw a line between polyamory and swingers, which intellectually, ideologically makes a lot of sense. Again, people are going to use terminology differently, and people may use the same term in slightly different ways, or they may use different terms to describe the same sort of relationship structure. But generally speaking, polyamory refers to people who are in multiple relationships. And so there's some sort of assumed commitment, there's some sort of shared relationship that goes beyond just sexual encounters. And most of the time when we're talking about swingers, we're talking about people who have generally open sexual relationships. So they may have sexual encounters with other people, but it doesn't necessarily assume any degree of relationship. So in terms of the definition or the sort of theoretical sense of the words, they mean different things. But one thing that I thought was very interesting is that at the same time that I was meeting this group of people who were polyamorous, I was also part of an online discussion board that a friend was running related to swingers. And this group of people who were all part of this swinging online community and who had get-togethers and parties and things from time to time, many of them had known each other for more than a decade and had been participating in swinging and different parties and things for a long time together, and they knew each other really well. Some of them were included in each other's family celebrations. Some people shared childcare. Many of them got together for birthday birthdays or other celebrations that didn't have a sort of sexual nature to them. And the people who were in that swingers group were also very particular about differentiating themselves from polyamory. And so I had these two groups of people that I was sort of looking at and comparing, who, when it came down to the terminology that they used and the words that they used, wanted to draw a very clear separation between the two groups. The polyamory folks didn't want to get mixed up with the swinging folks, and the swinging folks didn't want to get mixed up with the polyamory folks. But when you looked at the way that their relationships functioned, when you looked at their actual practice of ethical non-monogamy, I found that there were so many more things that were in common or that were similar than were different. And so for me, it's always been interesting to go in and look at the words that people use. What are the words or terms that people use? Why do they use them? What is it that draws them to that particular terminology? And are they using it the same as other people? That's one of the reasons why I like to identify my sexuality as queer, because when people hear queer, there isn't necessarily a box that they can put it into as easily as an identity like, let's say, gay or lesbian. A lot of people think they've figured out what gay or lesbian means. And so if you say that as an identity, they feel like they can put you into a box. Now, that doesn't mean that all the people who use the term gay or all the people who use the term lesbian mean the same thing, or that their relationships look the same, or that their sexual history and experiences look the same. But people often assume that. Now, with a term like queer, it's much different. People don't have as clear of a sense of what that means. And in fact, that's sort of the nature of queerness, is to be slippery and not easily categorizable. Is that a word? I'm making it a word. And that's why I'm always interested to know what terms or what words people use to describe their sexuality, their gender identity, their relationship structure, what have you. So in the interviews that are coming up, you're going to hear different terms or different ways of describing relationships, but don't just listen to the term that the person uses, also listen to how they describe and explore what that term means to them and to their relationships, because that to me is what's most important. And the final thing I want to say before we get into the interviews is that I didn't have a very scientific way of selecting people for this episode. I basically knew a few people that I asked outright, and then I also just put out a general call on Facebook for people who are willing to do a short interview about being in a non-monogamous relationship. And while I feel like I got a pretty interesting mix of people with different histories with non-monogamous relationships, people of different gender identities, a few people from diverse ethnic or racial backgrounds, this is only a super small sample of people. I interviewed a total of 10 people. And so this is certainly not meant to be any sort of exhaustive resource on non-monogamous relationships. And I'm not interested in that sort of content anyway. I'm much more interested in just letting people respond to questions and tell their stories. It wasn't about finding a bunch of quote unquote experts on polyamory or on non-monogamous relationships. Every individual that I interviewed is an expert on their own lived experience. Each one is sharing the truth from their life. And that's what I wanted to celebrate. Now, some of them may have more involvement in community organizing or education or activism. Some of them have less. Some of them have no interest in it at all. And that to me really wasn't the focus. It was more about talking about the relationship structures and the experiences and the terminology that they used. All right, if you did catch our last very special episode, this format will be very familiar to you. Basically, I'm going to ask each of my 10 interview guests to introduce themselves and say how long they've been involved in non-monogamous relationships. I'll follow that up by asking each of my questions, and for each question, I'll cut together all of their answers in the same order each time. If you're having trouble keeping track of who's who, I'll make sure to include all of their names in the show notes, so you can double check there if you get confused about who's saying what. This format was sort of a last-minute decision with the last very special episode, but I actually really liked it because I'm asking them all the same standard set of questions. Rather than just hearing from one person and getting their entire interview and then going on to the next, I like that each person is responding to the question and we get to see all of their answers next to each other. And we get to see the different ways that each one interprets it or uses the terminology and can compare and contrast their experiences and their uses of language. That's just the kind of nerd that I am. So now let's go ahead and dive right into those interviews.
Hi, I am Nicole, and I have identified as ethically non-monogamous for almost 5 years now.
Hi, my name is Sieber, and I've been in a polyamorous relationship for a little over 6 years now.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Miller. I have been ethically non-monogamous or identify as polyamorous for 12 years.
Hi, I'm Barry, and I've been involved in non-monogamy for a long time, on and off, depending on who I was with.
My name is Marissa. I'm 33, and I've been involved in non-monogamy since my early 20s.
Hi, this is Dana Nelson, and I've been involved in non-monogamy, not currently, but I was for about 1 year.
Hi, my name is Lisa. I've been involved in a non-monogamous relationship for almost 7 years.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm 39, and I've been involved in a non-monogamous relationship for about 5 years.
I'm Katie, and I've been doing non-traditional relationships for 5 years.
Hi, my name is April May, and I have been involved in a non-monogamous relationship for 2 years.
To start, what term or terms do you use to describe your relationships? And what does your relationship structure currently look like?
I use the term partner. I like it best. For a while there, I didn't use it because I wanted the LGBT people, which I'm a part of, but I wanted them to feel like it was theirs. But now I use it more, so it just becomes more mainstream, I guess. I consider myself polyamorous. I kind of use polyamory and non-monogamy in the same way. I currently only have one relationship, and that's fine, but I still identify as polyamorous. Currently, it's just my one partner and myself. We live separately because we work in different towns, and we have no desire to live together anytime soon. And both our previous relationship, both of us kind of ended poorly, and so we're just kind of taking our time.
Polyamorous, sometimes open, but that's kind of just describing the fact that I could date new people, but mostly it's polyamorous because my husband is married to a woman as well. So that is the three of us is the main core of the group. My husband is probably the core of it. He's got his wife and me, and then he also has a boyfriend that he does like RP stuff online, role-playing, and we'll see sometimes as well in person, but they tend to be mostly long distance. We're also all allowed to date on the outside. I have done that a few times. Nothing ended up being long-term, but you know, there's always that option, and as well as an option for that to become a full relationship as well. It's like full polyamory there.
I am married, so I am in an open marriage, but we both identify as polyamorous, and we also kind of identify strongly with the term relationship anarchist, which are a little bit more free, less rules, less restrictive. We are married with a young child. She is 17 months old, so we do have outwardly looking a very normal, what looks like monogamous heterosexual marriage. But actually our dynamic is more that we both date outside of our relationship, sometimes together, but generally not. We both go to parties where sexual things might happen. Yeah, mostly we both just date separately.
My base relationship is just like, for us, it's just a normal, I guess, relationship that folds into any kind of a setting, you know. I mean, we're boyfriend, girlfriend. It's so funny because we're poly-based, but like we're romantically monogamous. I guess, honestly, we're probably just swingers. But I think that we're probably, it's so complicated. That's our relationship title. It's complicated. Well, I have a primary partner, and she has friends, and I have friends. Sometimes the friends kind of overlap each other. She's a lot more active than I am, just because like I hate the entire dating scene anyway. I think that's probably why I'm somewhat monogamous as far as romantically goes.
Polyamorous. I would say that would be the number one. I can't think of anything particularly off the top of my head that goes further than that. I don't designate my partners in like any kind of ranking. You know, I have a husband, I have a fiance, and I have 2 partners. While there's obviously the 2 who spend much more time with me because they live with me, I don't have them in any kind of like ranking system.
It was me and my current fiance, who is male, and his female partner at the time, his girlfriend. And we used to call ourselves a triplet. Currently, he and her have had a break in their relationship about almost 2 years ago now. We all started off together. They were together before us, and then we all dated for about 2 or 3 months. And then their relationship was already disintegrating, and so they parted ways, and he and I had fallen in love, and with her blessing, we have actually continued our relationship, and now we're engaged.
We are in an open polyamorous relationship. My fiance has a lover, and he's open to the fact that I would also like to have one, and it's just the fact that we trust each other, you know, and we found each other first and just we're willing to expand our love to have more people in our family. It's a very strong, supportive structure. At first, his lover didn't quite understand how I'd be so okay with it. And I'm like, it doesn't bother me. He's got a huge heart. So if he has this much love to give to me, he can definitely share it with someone else.
I call myself open. I have a partner. We've been together, like I said, for 5 years. We are long distance, which is kind of the driving factor in why we became open, which is to say the difference, I don't mean to get too talky here, but the reason why I say open and not, for instance, poly, is that I don't have any other relationship. I have one partner. I have my partner, and then I have other business on the side.
Open relationship. Basically, we both get to just do our own thing and do whatever we want with other people and come back to each other at the end of the day.
I would have to say that we are open, or possibly even the term selective swingers, which isn't really a term, but we do explore outside of our base relationship. We are involved in BDSM, and we each have pursuant relationships outside of our base one. I, for instance, have a submissive. He is what I would consider my primary, sexual and life partner. And then I have a submissive as well that is non-sexual, like kind of on the side, I guess I would say. And then we also explore sexually outside of our base relationship.
What's the biggest challenge you've had in your non-monogamous relationships?
Having people understand that it's still valid, that I'm not cheating, that everyone that I am partnered with understands that I identify as polyamorous, even if they don't.
Probably the biggest problems have been, oddly enough, just like regular like couple problems that weren't actually related to the polyamory. Like John and his wife, they had to like kind of restructure their give and take because he was doing a lot of things for her that she didn't really want him to do, and so they kind of had to establish some boundaries. And I think that's something that could happen in any relationship. So I just kind of like had to watch it happen. Tried to stay out of it because unless I was asked, it wasn't really my business. And I guess we've also had to adapt to living together. We all rent an apartment. So there's 3 of us, and it gets kind of crowded sometimes. And we kind of just have to learn to be in each other's space. So that's been different for me for sure.
I would say that the biggest challenge we've had has been time management, especially since having a child. That has been a constant struggle, and we generally go to Google Calendar to make sure that we're not double or triple booking ourselves, because that has happened. Yeah, I would say that making enough time for our relationship as well as developing new relationships, and then also we both find it very important to have me time. I have hobbies that are separate from him, and he has hobbies and activities that he really enjoys. We both have our own friends that we like to hang out with. And so we try to make it very possible in our relationship to be able to have all of the things that we want to do and be able to go out with all the people that we want to. It can still be a struggle, though.
Like, one of our rules is we kind of have to give the okay. And she's young. She's much younger than I am. So she's slightly naive at points. So a lot of times she doesn't realize that people are kind of goobers. She'll sort of get into the point where she's in like the the first or second stage of setting up dates or anything like that, I'll meet the person and be like, are you sure you want to put in time with that one? Are you sure? That seems like to be the biggest problem, I guess. Just the simpleness that it kind of comes up, and it doesn't like ever lead to a fight. It's not even really a challenge. I think that's just like the continual point. It's like, really, are you sure you want to keep going with that? I think she's like busted me on it like once, and it's kind of been a recurrent thing with her. It's not very often that I feel like I need to go out of my way to try to date someone or something to that effect.
Previously, I would say making sure that they all get along. There have been some who my husband especially hasn't particularly cared for because they make no effort to get to know him or to even acknowledge him. You know, he doesn't ask for a lot. Acknowledgement and respect goes a long way. In my current structure, they're all friends, so it makes it a lot easier. The part of it is that I tend to gravitate toward quieter people like myself, so sometimes just getting someone to talk can be particularly difficult.
It all depends on where you're coming from as an individual and how you see if you are threatened or not. She was very open at first, the idea of the triplet, and she was the one whose idea it really was in the first place. She was attracted to me. She wanted to spice up their love life. And then as we all got to hang out more and getting to know each other more, we all really seemed to connect on a deeper level than just sexuality or sexual experiences together. And so we started dating. The biggest kind of hurdle for the whole thing was that she was very insecure about having another woman involved, despite her protests that she wanted an open relationship. She was very insecure about him and me bonding or connecting sexually.
The challenge is finding the right person that can balance with how we are and understanding that it takes a lot of trust and a lot of communication with all parties involved, because we don't want to disrespect the main partner. We want to make sure that if she says, hey, honey, is it okay if I have some, intimacy with the other partner? I'm like, honey, that's fine. Because there it is where I'll want to try and find to have intimacy with someone else. And we just want to make sure that we have that communication open.
The biggest challenge is just setting and maintaining boundaries, because I think that in an open relationship in particular, you have to both be in agreement as to what the limits and boundaries are. And I think that was something that when we had the discussion, when we decided to open up, we said what was acceptable, what was not acceptable, what we wanted to hear about, what we didn't want to hear about. And I think the biggest challenge is just playing by the rules, I would say.
Making sure we spend enough time with each other instead of just with other people.
Definitely communication. You have to communicate the crap out of everything. You have to talk things over. You have to be completely 100% honest with things that you are and are not okay with, and making that very clear to your partner. I think when there's fouls within relationships that are non-monogamous, it is almost always due to some kind of lack of communication or understanding of what your partner is wanting or needing.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about non-monogamous relationships?
That we get to have sex with whoever we want, whenever we want. That's the worst. Especially on dating apps. They're like, oh, you're polyamorous. You can just screw whoever you want. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. It's about consent. That's the biggest thing.
I would think the biggest misconception is that it means that we're not, loyal to each other. We're there for each other and we do things for each other to help out in whatever way we can, same as we would if we were monogamous. We're not sexually exclusive, and of course we can have partnerships on the outside, but that doesn't mean that they're not important to us. And, we still prioritize their feelings, and it's important to check in and make sure what those feelings are. I think that's probably it, is that non-monogamy does not equal disloyalty.
A really big misconception is just that we're different from everyone else. And I do feel like we do think about things differently, and sometimes we'll kind of be like, wow, monogamous people, what the fuck is going on in their head? Because, we definitely come at things from a point of view of not feeling possessive over each other or other people, and not trying to encourage or reward jealousy. And I feel like societally that does happen a lot, but we are very normal people with normal lives. And when I identify as poly to someone new, they might think I'm weird, or I don't know, and I am weird. So it's hard to say I'm a totally normal person, but that I'm not like some crazy sex fiend that is, I don't know, dating 10 people and totally insatiable and can't commit to one person and all these things. I just feel like we're all really normal people. It's just we like more and we don't want to limit ourselves. We don't think society should be able to limit who and how we love.
That we're all whores and we just want to fuck. I don't know if I could say that, if you gotta bleep it, that we just want to have sex with everyone all the time. And it's like, no, I still have expectations. I still have boundaries. She does as well. She tends to get bored with people very easily. I get bored with people really easily. And sometimes I could spend like 5 minutes with somebody and know if I want to hang out with them for another 5 minutes, or if I want to hang myself. I think that's definitely the biggest misconception.
One, that it's about sex, and, sex can be involved or not, but people tend to think polyamory means I just want to fuck whoever, and it can be that way, but people think that's all it is. And I'm much more of a person who likes sharing intimacy and cuddling and shared interests. That's a bigger deal to me than sex. It's much more of an emotional thing for me, but that doesn't make it any more valid than someone who's all about physicality because of our pilgrim culture. There's also that it's only for straight cisgender people, and that's not the case. And since our relationships tend to be devalued by society or seen as less important, being polyamorous and queer, I think that just people misconceptualize that as not only devaluing our own partners, but reinforcing their confirmation bias that queer people are only queer in terms of sex.
I think the biggest misconception would be that it's only sexual, that it's just like some kinky threesome or foursome or whatever people are into or that they're pursuing, that it's just like about the sex. And sure, the sex can be very interesting and kinky and cool, but when you spend time with people and when you're intimate with people, there is such a level of connection that I think that people don't recognize. I think that the misperception is that it's just like this kinky, sexy, weird thing, when in reality, you are forming like the closest bonds with these people, and it can be something so much deeper than that.
I think the biggest misconception is everyone thinks, well, from what I've read from research and things like that, they think that people would call it cheating or that it's just wrong or that it's dirty or, stuff like that. And it's like, no, I think actually it's quite beautiful because, I don't know, it's something that's kind of complicated to explain, if you know what I mean.
I think the biggest misconception about non-monogamous relationships is that they are people who are not happy and they need to look elsewhere, and that they come from a place of unhappiness, that they come from a place of inadequacy, that they come from a place of I'm not getting what I need in my relationship and I need to do blank.
Well, with open relationships, I think it's that most of the people are just whores. We're not. We need to be free.
That there isn't love within that relationship, or that you're not getting your needs met. It's not so much about meeting your needs as much as there's things that others can offer that maybe my partner isn't as comfortable giving me, and he has enough selfless love that he is willing to let me step outside of our relationship so that I can get my wants, I guess more my wants than my needs met, if that makes sense.
What's the biggest lesson that you've learned about relationships from being in a non-monogamous relationship?
That you don't have to stay in a relationship if you're not happy. That's the biggest one. I was in a relationship for 12 and a half years and we weren't happy. And I just figured, well, we've been in here this long that I just have to stay with it. And he actually broke up with me this past summer. It was about the best thing that could happen to me.
What I've learned the most is that you can't be afraid to communicate. Sometimes there are things that are hard to say, but it's almost always better to come out and say it than it is to keep it to yourself. Sometimes it can cause pain, but if you end up realizing that you're not right for each other, well, then that's probably a good thing to find out. It's best to always be honest and upfront about how you're feeling.
How incredibly important communication is. Especially in my early 20s, I was in a lot of relationships in which communication was very poor, and I hadn't developed communication and actually really just the vocabulary for my feelings and voicing my feelings. And then on also knowing that those feelings are important and should be voiced. I hadn't developed those capabilities yet. And so all of those relationships really crashed and burned. And I feel like that's pretty normal for most people that are in their first few relationships because you don't know how to communicate. And there's really no good model, especially in TV and on movies where a lack of communication is what's causing the drama. So therefore it's entertaining. You know, we just don't have any frame of reference for good communication styles. Learning how to talk openly and honestly with the person I really love has been a ongoing learning experience. I mean, literally, I think I get better every year, and I've been doing this for 12 years, and it's also helped me in every other aspect of my life. I can now talk about my feelings with a coworker. I can now talk about the things that I'm upset about with, you know, a family member because I've developed those capabilities in my relationship.
Jealousy is like the silliest thing ever when you just cut out the need for it, I suppose, for lack of a better term. I guess when you cut out the spot for it, it's no longer an issue. With regular monogamous relationships that I've been in, if I was going to hang out with anyone that maybe I've had history with or someone that I found attractive or anything else, my partner would instantaneously think that something was up and something was amiss. You come home and you get the third degree and all of that. And for what? Because you went to hang out with a friend that, you know, you slept with 5 years ago. With the relationship that I'm in now, and even like positive poly relationships that I've been in previously to this one that I'm in now, that's not an issue. I guess that's a lesson that jealousy in situations is such a silly thing.
That you don't have to be everything to somebody, or you don't have to be everything for somebody, nor do they to you. I am a person who is incredibly busy a lot and is always doing something and always going into something 1,000% full, you know, pedal to the floor. And that can be a lot to deal with, both in terms of keeping up and with the inevitable fallouts when I overexert myself, especially being an autistic person. Sometimes I can go nonverbal or completely dissociate. I joke that my husband hired middle management in terms of having my other partners because sometimes they can just tag each other out, be like, it's your shift, you know. Especially after I had bottom surgery, you know, they were tagging in and out, taking turns, taking care of me, and making sure I got what I needed. Love is not a pie. Just because you love more than one person doesn't mean you love the first person less. And the pressure that the society puts on you to have the one and to have, you know, one person be everything for you does more harm than good, in my opinion. It's a lot of pressure to conform to someone else's interests and want to do everything with them and to be the sole source of their emotional catharsis. In polyamory, that gets divvied up a little bit. And I think that's not only good for the external relationships, but for the, you know, so as some people would call it, the primary one, because they aren't solely responsible for doing everything, sharing all your interests, all your emotional outlets. I think it strengthens.
That's an interesting question. I think actually it would be about finding like real connections with people. With the three of us in a relationship together, it was all about compromise. And I think that taught all of us a lot, trying to meet each other halfway or three ways or however it goes, and just understanding a little bit more what your partners need. And I think that the biggest relationship lesson I've taken away from it is basically to be more considerate of your partner or partners.
To definitely have patience, number one, and to not have any judgment when it comes to relationships, because each relationship is different. If you choose to have a monogamous relationship, then that works fine for you. If you choose to have a non-monogamous relationship, that's fine for you. And to be able to try and understand where each different person's mindset is, I think that takes also a lot of courage to try and understand where different people come from.
It's important to be as upfront and honest with the people you are in a relationship with as possible. You have to have a certain degree of trust and a certain degree of comfort with the person you're in a relationship with to know that if they go out and do blank, that they're still committed to you, and vice versa. They have to trust you and know that whatever you're doing, your primary is them. At least that's how it is in my relationship.
Every relationship is different, and every relationship has its own rules and comfort levels.
This is actually my first actual relationship, so I'm learning a lot as we go. I don't know. It's a good question. Going one day at a time. So since entering into a non-monogamous relationship, the biggest lesson I've learned is that you do have to be open and communicative with your partner, even when it's painful to do so, even when you feel like you have fear that they won't be understanding of your needs or wants. You still have to, they can't read your mind. That's probably the main thing that I've learned, is that your partner is not a mind reader, and you have to be 100% open and upfront about your needs and wants.
All right, that's it for my 10 interview subjects. I hope you enjoyed what they had to say, and I hope you paid attention to the kinds of things that they talked about. I structured the questions very specifically because I wanted to know what sort of terms and descriptions and structures their relationships had, but I also just wanted to know how they felt about relationships in general. And all of the things that they talked about are relatable to anybody who's looking for or is in a relationship. Communication, honesty, trust, loyalty, love. As much as we like to label and divide and keep things separate, the things that are at the heart of those relationships are the things that anybody would be looking for, are the things that anyone would value. And so it's important to talk about and highlight differences. It's important to put stories out there that remind people that monogamy isn't the only way to structure relationships. And for some people, it's not the best way, or it's not their preferred way. Some people entered into non-monogamous relationships very purposefully, and some people just sort of wandered into them by circumstance. But no matter how they got there, what really matters is what they found along the way. Thank you so much for listening to this very special episode of Janessa After Dark. And of course, thank you to my interview guests, Nicole, Lindsay, Barry, Marissa, Dana, Lisa, Kevin, Katie, April, and of course a very special thank you to Sieber. He's actually the ex-fella that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. It was great to have a chance to catch up with him, and even though he still has terrible taste in movies, I realized that one of my greatest regrets in this life is related to my relationship with him, and it's that I didn't kidnap his cat. That's an important lesson for you. When you break up with someone, unfortunately, you also break up with their pets. This has been a very special episode of Janessa After Dark. While you're here, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, a rating, a comment, some sort of engagement. We really do appreciate it. And it really does help other people find the podcast as well. Feel free to share the link on your social media and reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns, or even ideas for future episodes. While you're looking at my show, don't forget to check out my limited series podcast, Miss Jaye, the Renovation. It will eventually be 17 episodes, and it's all about me trying to fast track some personal happiness, some self-growth, and some positive change using cheesy self-help books. There's some laughs, there's some tears, and some rather surprising life lessons. Miss Jaye, the Renovation is available in all the same places that you get Janessa After Dark, including SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher. This episode of Janessa After Dark features royalty-free music from bensound.com. In the order that you heard them, this episode includes the tracks Actionable, which serves as our podcast intro, Memories, and Happiness, which you're listening to now. For these and other great royalty-free tracks, please visit bensound, that's BEN sound.com. Janessa After Dark is written and directed by Chris M. Stoner and is a Champagne Dreams production.